Well, thank you very much, sir. I thought that your speech of introduction, which was very kind and very robust, I thought it was going to be a preamble to saying, so we can't possibly have you speaking here this afternoon. But having already enjoyed some very good speeches today, and having already had a delightful lunch, I suppose I'd better sing for it. Well, look. Throughout the 1950s, the Church of England was thriving. Attendances at Sunday services actually increased, and there was a boom in the numbers of christenings and marriages. For 300 years, there had been three main parties in the church: the high, the low, and the broad. The high churches were heirs of either the old high churchmen of the late 18th century, and their roots went back to such as Archbishop Laud, or the Anglo-Catholic movement of 100 years later. The low churches were either lively evangelical parishes with a strong emphasis on the Bible and preaching, or quietist places with a minimum of ceremony. Matins and Evensong, from the Book of Common Prayer, 1662. In the high churches, the priest elevated the host at the Eucharist, while at 11 a.m. Sunday matins, the plain-clad minister performed the solemn elevation of the collecting plate. Broad churchmen were liberals of the old-fashioned sort, light on dogma and doctrine, vaguely deistic, practitioners of the sort of free thinking that we find in the writings of George Eliot. All these three main parties differed widely in doctrine and practice, but united in their use of the prayer book and the authorized version of the Bible. There was some mild sectarian rivalry, a little entertaining joshing of a generally gentle sort, and many jokes. This is in the 20th century, not the 16th. Not all of these jokes were bad. At the beginning of the 1960s, when sex began for Philip Larkin too late, two sorts of innovation destroyed this largely unspoken but affectionate traditional arrangement in the church. The first of these was theological iconoclasm. This came first, and it was followed by change to liturgical worship on a grand scale. So in this theological iconoclasm, paperback books became all the rage. These were some of the titles, all written by Anglican divines and high-ranking, highly placed Christians. Objections to Christian belief, the secular meaning of the gospel, the gospel of Christian atheism, but that I can't believe, radical theology and the death of God. All these books were written by parsons. One of the earliest tracts, and most successful of them all, Honest to God, by John Robinson, Bishop of Woolwich. He launched this talkative religious bestseller. It was reprinted half a dozen times inside a year, with a long article on the front of the Observer newspaper entitled, "Our Image of God Must Go," by which he clearly meant your image of God must go. In this book, Honest to God, honest John Robinson sought thoroughly to undermine our notions of the being of God. He said this: in place of a God who is literally or physically up there, we have accepted as part of our mental furniture a God who is spiritually or metaphysically out there. But Christians for 2,000 years had held as their core belief the objective metaphysical existence of God. Honest to God was an explicit denial of this. Robinson's book was catastrophic in another way. In chapter 6, the corresponding chapter number of Freddie Ayre's Language, Truth and Logic, in which Ayre had announced the meaningless of our ethical terms, Robinson preached the utilitarian morality of Jeremy Bentham with a faintly churchy veneer, and invented the term situation ethics. Situation ethics denies the authority of the Ten Commandments and instead declares that our moral decisions should be guided by whatever we decide, quote, is the loving thing to do in the moment. In other words, you make up your own moral philosophy on the hoof. Situation ethics soon became known as the new morality, while a wit remarked that it was only the old immorality in a miniskirt. This appalling book had enormous influence, going into half a dozen reprints in as many months. I say it was appalling because it was philosophically incompetent, theologically illiterate, ethically nihilistic, and sensationalizing above all. The mass media, which at the time, remember that was the week that was and all those other shows, was performing a frenzy of irreverence to all authority and a general debunking of traditional values in what were misleadingly described as satirical television programs. Satire, Jonathan Swift would not have understood the word. And of course, the media seized upon honest to God with a drooling relish, talking endlessly of the atheist bishop, and the bandwagon began to roll. Ironically, this infantilized craving for novelty among Christians was described by its perpetrators as Christianity come of age, a phrase coined by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, friend of George Bell, that underminer of Bomber Command, who was recently being seen to be about other things. Well, the bandwagon rolled on and gathered pace through the decade of student radicalism, campus unrest, inner-city riots, and the new feminism. The climate was radical chic and antinomian. In 1977, the Reverend Dr. John Hick edited a book of essays by radical priests and theologians and published it under the title The Myth of God Incarnate, in which the authors denied the traditional view of Jesus as God and man. The new theology and the new morality were enthusiastically taken up by the most prominent people in the church, bishops, deans, principals of theological colleges, and the like. It thus resembled a churchy form of the Frankfurt School, undermining traditional institutions from within. And the radicals ever since, in positions of authority, have simply promoted their like-minded friends to high office, and a new modernizing establishment now exists. You might say that the Church of England has effectively resigned. But the iconoclasts and the virtual atheists who became the new establishment were left with a big problem on their hands. If you denied, as they did, that Scripture and traditional church teaching actually mean what they say, what do you do with the words of the Bible and the doctrines of the Christian fathers? Answer, in the phrase coined by Professor Rudolf Bultmann of the University of Marburg, you demythologize them. How? Well, take a practical example. Take the feeding of the 5,000. Obviously, the new non-believing theologians could not by any means accept that this was one of our Lord's miracles. But there it remains in the Bible. So how do you deal with it? Answer? It was a socialist picnic. Turn it into a banal story about sharing and make it part of the social gospeling ideology which eventually grew and developed into today's rampant egalitarianism and levelling down. Levelling, by the way, is always, always down. The most level society is the prison. What about the resurrection of Christ? The modernizers did not believe it, of course, for they had been taught by But That I Can't Believe, Robinson's sequel to Honest to God, that the resurrection of Christ is one of those things which no one in his right mind could believe. But there it is, stubbornly remaining in all four Gospels. So what to make of it? What they did was to deny that it happened, and instead they psychologized and subjectified it. These leaders, who were supposed to be our spiritual fathers in God, our religious teachers and defenders of the faith, did not believe that Jesus had risen from the dead, so they said instead that after his death, his disciples experienced new life. Thus they left entirely unexplained where this experience of new life came from if Jesus remained dead. And it left also unanswered the other question too. Would the first Christian men and women really preach what they knew to be a lie? Would they really have had the courage to suffer martyrdom for what they knew was a cock and bull story? This secularization of Christianity has accelerated over the years, so that now the church is run by practical atheists, from Welby down. This is why you never hear many of our bishops and other senior clergy speak directly about the scriptures or the doctrines of the creed. They don't believe what the Bible and the creeds actually say. And so they retreat and reinterpret Christian doctrine in terms of the secular opinions of our time. And these opinions are always merely political. And of course they are always the fashionable left-wing prejudices of the day. Listen to Thought for the Day, for instance. Listen to Brother Giles Fraser. If you can, you will need no emmettment. There are pockets of reaction here and there. Not every parish in the land has bowed the knees of the new secularized Baal, but these pockets are rare, and when they are identified, the bishops and deans, who are the new establishment, do all they can to stamp them out. I speak whereof I know, for I am one of those who has been stamped out. Over 15 years, the priests, church wardens, parochial church council, and faithful parish clerks of two historically renowned but declined and moribund churches in the City of London revived these parishes by reinstating the prayer book and the authorised version, and by teaching the traditional faith. The congregation over that period increased tenfold. When the priest, that was me, was forced to retire at the age of 70, as we all are, the Bishop of London appointed in one church an arch-moderniser who had done more than most to devise and promote the inferior new church services, of which more in due course, and to the other church, a theologically ignorant, happy-clappy priest with his guitars and overhead projectors, his worship songs, and the full repertoire of the Jiving for Jesus liturgy. Now, here is a strange phenomenon. While Christianity is dying in Europe, it is burgeoning in Africa, South America, and much of Asia, including China. The faith thrives in these places because its bishops and priests believe, teach, and practice the traditional, undemythologized faith. These traditional churches are despised by the secularized bien-pensants who run the church in England. But the non-believing new hierarchy has got itself into a delicious jam, and it thrills me to see it. For every 10 years, all the Anglican bishops worldwide are summoned to a conference in Lambeth. I note that the Archbishop of Canterbury, Mr. Oyle Welby, is trying to make up his mind whether the next Lambeth conference should be postponed or even cancelled. Why? Because the last thing Welby wants is to host what would soon turn out to be an embarrassing confrontation between his secularized English bishops and the believing black prelates from foreign parts. Now all we hear, all we've heard for the last 20 years from the bishops' palaces, the archdeaconries and the theological colleges is endless palaver about diversity, equality, underprivilege, deprivation, social exclusion, saving the bloody planet, and the whole panoply of claptrap. No, stop, time's running out. No, it really is, believe me. If you don't believe in God, who is the metaphysical reality, if you believe the feeding of the 5,000 was that socialist picnic, if you think that the resurrection was a mere shift in the disciples' mood, then there is nothing left for you to engage with except the secular dogmas of this world. And that is exactly what the Anglican hierarchy has done for these last 40 years, and with great enthusiasm. They have supported every one of successive governments' innovations in social policy since the 1960s, so that now services of blessing for same-sex couples, scarcely distinguishable from gay marriages, are widely performed. This conformity to secular mores has gone so far that in his last address before his retirement, the bearded lefty Rowan Williams, former Archbishop of Canterbury, declared the Church has a great deal of catching up to do with secular values. No, he actually said that. And I wrote a one-liner to The Guardian, which they didn't print. I said, whatever happened to the text, be ye not conformed to this world? So now I want to talk a little about liturgical change. I suppose those of you who go to church, this is the thick end. This is where you will get it on a Sunday. It's becoming increasingly difficult to find an Anglican church which still uses the Book of Common Prayer. The modernising senior clergy hate the prayer because, as Eliot reminded us, it tells them of evil and sin and other unpleasant facts they constantly try to escape from the darkness outside and within by dreaming of systems so perfect that no one will need to be good. Is there a clearer definition? That was written in the 1930s, by the way, of Tom Eliot. Is there a clearer definition of political correctness than that? Men dreaming of systems so perfect that no one will need to be good. That just about says it all to me. The bishops and the leadership in the General Synod believe above all in progress, and so they are offended by the prayer book, which insists that however emancipated and liberated they might imagine themselves to be, they are yet sinners who fall short of the glory of God. Therefore, in the 1960s, the progressive hierarchy set about devising new forms of church services which would reflect their progressive and optimistic mindset. Of course, it would not have been possible to throw out the prayer book at once and replace it with new inventions, for the Church of England was, disagreeably for the modernisers, firmly attached to the old book. The rank and file would have to be weaned off it in stages. So the revisers, like the entryists and the Trotskyists and the Leninists, the revisers proceeded by stealth. They began by introducing something, some of you are perhaps old enough to remember it, called Series 1, a collection of booklets containing Matins, Evensong, Holy Communion, Baptism, Wedding, Funeral, which were only slight modifications of the prayer. These booklets were soon followed, however, by the rather more radical Series 2, finally by Series 3, in which the services bore little resemblance to those in the old prayer. In 1980, the General Synod's Liturgical Commission collected all the Series 3 revisions in a volume 3 times as long as the original prayer book of 1662, and they published it as the Alternative Service Book. The Synod spent millions of pounds of churchgoers, of your money, advertising it as the greatest publishing event in 400 years. And the Archbishop of York, John Hapgood, was seen to be blowing his trumpet in the Church Times, writing, "The publication of the Alternative Service Book has made a handsome profit for the Church's Board of Finance." Actually, the book, which was acclaimed by its devisers as the greatest publishing event in 400 years, enjoyed a mere 20 years of life before the bishops and the synod, wait for it, banned it. How ironic that the ever so politically correct and impeccable liberal hierarchy of the Church should copy the book-burning practices of Nazi Germany and dictatorships everywhere else. They wanted to make some more money, you see, so in the year 2000 they replaced it with something else, something much longer and something much worse, called common worship. The prevailing revisionist party among the senior clergy and the General Synod prefer to describe themselves as liberals, but they are nothing of the sort. John Stuart Mill was a liberal, but even John Stuart Mill understood that liberalism is not about counting heads and doing what the majority wants, but it also involves consideration for dissenting minorities. The so-called liberals who rule the Church of England will have none of this. Their desire is to establish hegemony, and they tolerate only those who agree with them. There were so many alternative rites and prayers in the alternative service book that the poet C.H. Sisson was led to refer to it as the book of variance. But in common worship, the concept of variety has been raised almost to infinity. In fact, it's hard to determine whether there is a single item which we can refer to as the book called common worship. There is such a plethora of permitted alternatives and downloads that the very existence of the book might be a topic for speculative metaphysics. A better title for common worship would have been, in my view, Prayers for the New Baby. Let us look first at common worship's baptism, marriage and funeral services, because these are the offices used by the occasional churchgoers who represent largely and increasingly unchurched general public. In the old prayer book, the public baptism of infants is a rite which takes sin and the devil seriously. But in common worship, it is retitled initiation services, which I'm afraid only makes me think of Masonic law and corny witchcraft films on late-night television. Common worship is full of little explanations in the language of nodding and baby talk. It says on baptism, it says this, can you believe it? It says this: this is a demanding task for which you will need the help and grace of God. Can you imagine a bishop sitting down and writing that? I can imagine all of them doing it together. It is the infantilized form of expression used by condescending adults when speaking to unruly children. And don't forget to brush the backs of your teeth as well as the front. Many of the intrusive injunctions in common worship look as if they have been called from the secular psychotherapeutic culture or the self-help guidebooks on the mind, body and spirit shelf in the wacky bookshop. It says this in the baptism service. Would you believe? Would you expect to read this in the Church of England? God invites you on a lifelong journey. No, I haven't finished yet. And Christian formation must allow an individual's story to be heard. Oh, come. Successful liturgical language effects an immediate presentation of the spiritual mystery. Liturgical language is less than successful when it is overwhelmingly discursive and tries to explain the mystery. For attempts to explain what is inexpressible, because transcendent, are bound to result in bathos. For example, the prayer book service, the public baptism of infants, brilliantly says, by the baptism of thy well-beloved Son, Jesus Christ, in the river Jordan, thou didst sanctify water to the mystical washing away of sin. Now, even if you haven't got an ounce of religion in you, that's beautiful. And the use of particular names and places in that, it roots the prayer in tangible reality. The reference to Jesus Christ draws us close to him, which is just what is required at a baptism. Common worship rewrites this passage, removing all the evocative homely detail, and the result is something which sounds like instruction for operating a washing machine. This is what it says. Now sanctify this water, but that by the power of your Holy Spirit they may be cleansed from sin and born again. Now sanctify. What a way to talk to God. Even if we ignore that peremptory now, and are we really meant to issue ultimatums to the Almighty, the sensation produced by the common version of worship is of a peculiar flatness of tone, in which the priest does not by image and rhythm evoke a mysterious spiritual landscape, but merely describes what he hopes is going on. It's really the language of the liturgical dialogue. Holy baptism is a full and holy cure of the most dread disease, and this disease is sin. It is dreadful because, as Scripture tells us, its wages are death. The prayer book makes this terrifyingly clear right at the start. Dearly beloved, for as much as all men are conceived and born in sin. Common worship does not get round to a mention of sin until the candidate makes his so-called decision. In fact, the Pelagian tendency permeates this new book. It's as if we must not be led to think badly of ourselves, but should at all times keep up what practitioners in our psychotherapeutic culture call self-esteem. Modern liturgists have frequently tried to explain to me why they omitted the words conceived and born in sin. They say we must not use language which suggests there is something unclean about sexual intercourse or giving birth, language that is also said to be, in quote, offensive to women. But the prayer book writes neither implies physical uncleanness nor disparages women. The sin it refers to is original sin, which according to such unprogressed minds as the author of Genesis, the Apostle Paul and St. Augustine, is the heritage and mark of all men. Common worship's initiation services are theologically feeble because they contain no suggestion of this deep soil with which we are all marked. So we are left wondering about the purpose of common worship's holy baptism. Of course it's a family occasion when we publicly welcome a new member of the human race, but there is meant to be more to it than that. We receive her into the congregation of Christ's flock, which is the company of those God has redeemed from the severe stain of sin. And in this company, the infant will have to learn that there is a fight on against sin, the world, and the devil. To play down the sheer evilness of evil and its spoiling presence in the human heart is at the same time, please note, to play down the redeeming work of Christ. If there is no sin, did he die for nothing then? What are bishops for God's sake? These revises also show a disquieting unfamiliarity with the nature of traditional liturgical language. In the commentary by the Liturgical Commission on Initiation Services, there is a section entitled, you won't believe this, but there is accessible language, which says, the full and rich imagery surrounding baptism and the comparative ignorance of this imagery in many sections of modern society pose a major problem in the drafting of services of Christian initiation. This is certainly true. And whose fault is this, by the way? But their solution to this problem for evangelism is to abandon the full and rich imagery, whereas a better solution would be to present the full and rich imagery so that sections of modern society, as they say, might hear it and become enriched by it. People have to be taught. The prayer book includes all those stern and psychologically accurate words in the introduction to the solemnization of matrimony, in which the couple, and indeed the whole congregation, are admonished concerning carnal lusts and appetites, a remedy against sin, and to avoid fornication, that such persons as have not the gift of continency might marry, and so keep themselves undefiled members of Christ's body. Compared with this, the moral teaching of common worship's marriage service is unrealistic and shares with the Hollywood musical elements of sheer fantasy. There is no mention of carnal lusts and appetites, or of the moral, personal, and social dangers which these failings involve. Do we not have a bigger divorce rate than ever? Instead, the bridegroom and bride are made to say to each other, all that I am, I give to you. But do they give each other their bad temper and their indigestion? It's like the first line of a song crooned by Elton John. If we believe that the marriage ceremony exists in order to bestow through the sacrament some help and protection, some remedy against sin, and to leave out all mention of sin, is to leave the couple to their own scant devices. Later in the service, the priest, you won't believe this, but I'm sorry, it was in the book, the priest says, let them be tender with each other's dreams. I always thought there should be an additional rubric printed at this point. The congregation shall now throw up. Bride's family side first. Such gooey phrases are just another example of the vague, untheological, touchy-feely language that has displaced such words as, I require and charge you both, as ye will answer at the dreadful day of judgment. But there is no judgment here, neither of the theological nor of the literary sort, only sentimental self-indulgence. It is hard to attach a clear meaning to let them be tender with each other's dreams. Does it mean don't let them disillusion each other? But the marriage service is meant to be an example of illusions being swept away at the very beginning of the couple's shared life together. The solemnization of matrimony does just that. It lets the couple know that they are always in the presence of so many and great dangers arising out of their own corrupt desires. Moreover, it insists that one of the main causes for which matrimony was ordained is, as the prayer book said, the procreation of children. Of course, we know that plenty of children may be procreated outside marriage, but, says the prayer book, it is marriage which confers their legitimacy. Common worship is vague at this point. It says, it is given as the foundation of family life in which children are born and nurtured, as if there was something not providential, but merely accidental about this birth and nurturing. We know why the compilers insist on this studied evasiveness and systematic ambiguity. It is out of their fear of being thought judgmental and of excluding those who beget children out of wedlock. But it makes no difference. Why bother with the institution of marriage at all? Or is the remedy against sin merely optional? The smoky, romantic atmosphere also pervades common worship's funeral services. Perhaps the most disturbing and awful verse in the whole Bible is the one which reports Jesus' reaction to the news of the death of his friend Lazarus. Jesus wept. In common worship, he's only moved to tears, as if he had been watching Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet go down in the Titanic for the umpteenth time. Jesus wept is a terrible saying about the nature and extent of the divine compassion. It's the shortest word in the Bible, and surely the most potent. Jesus was moved to tears, suggests only emotional incontinence. Though worms destroy this body, in the funeral service, has been replaced by the bizarre expression, after my skin has been destroyed. What? After sitting too long under the sunlight? Some thought that the 4 Eucharistic prayers in the alternative service book were too many. Common worship has 8. Banality here is piled upon banality. In the Book of Common Prayer, single prayer of consecration, it says, most movingly, in the same night that he was betrayed, he took bread. Common worship's prayer, E, says he had supper with his friends. Which only makes me want to ask, well, Chinese takeaway or pizza hut? Prayers for various occasions reveals a radical shift in the perceived order of precedence, as the bishops pray for themselves before they pray for the Queen. In the prayer that you may remember, the one that we were all brought up on, the Queen, as Supreme Governor of the Church of England, comes first in the list of petitions. In the alternative service book, Her Majesty came second. But here, in Common Worship's most recent demotion, she comes 9th. One might suspect a creeping republicanism, a suspicion not dissolved by the prayer which follows. How about this? For members of the European institutions. Well, you can stuff that one.
In all this, what might at first appear to be a minor adjustment, we see a profound shift in theological understanding. It is not a matter of no importance that the bishops put themselves above the sovereign, but a fundamental understanding of the nature of what the Church of England is. For the prayer book, the monarch is supreme governor who appoints the bishops. To put the bishops before the Queen is therefore to announce a change in the order of authority. The bishops are the masters now, and the Queen is prayed for as an afterthought. In the Commission's introduction to common worship, planning for change, suggestions and ideas, it says, when the alternative service book was published, no one knew which, if any, of the new services would stand the test of time. 20 years and they banned it, you remember. 20 years. It's an eccentric notion of what constitutes the test of time. Cranmer's book has stood that test since 1549. We should, after all, have some sympathy with the task facing these revisers. They could not ignore the comprehensive failure of the alternative service book to halt the catastrophic decline in church attendance during the period of its issue. Something had to be done, but what? I suggest the best thing would have been for them to instruct the church wardens throughout the land to find that cupboard in the vestry where the vicar has hidden all the copies of the prayer book and to put them out in the pews again.